And so glad to have you all here. All right, we're going to talk about outstanding writing today. So we're so glad to have you all here, and and we're going to talk about what it looks like in 2025, how it's changing, how it's always been the same, and we'll dive in here. Again, if you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat, who you are, where you're from, one thing bringing you joy this week. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. I'm only on one screen today instead of having a great monitor because we are traveling, but I will do my best. Before we get started, a couple notes housekeeping wise. One, a recording and slides will be shared with you after the session. Uh, Someone's going to ask you at some point. Please just let them know. Yes, they'll be shared. Two, this is approved for 1.0 CFRE credits. How do you get credit? At the end of the session, there will be a link in the chat to a survey. My colleague Phoebe is going to drop it in. Thank you, Phoebe, for all your hard work. Fill that out. You'll get credit. We'll back you up if you get audited. If you have questions, ask the questions in the chat or the Q&A. We'll keep an eye on it, and we'll maybe get to some questions at the end, depending on how long it goes. We might not sometimes because we want to make sure everybody gets some extra time back. So we'll check that out. All right, here's the agenda. Again, recording slides will be sent around later today. Intros, Evergreen writing best practices, tips for an outstanding appeal. We'll really walk through it piece by piece and dissect it, which is going to be fun, and crafting major and planned giving appeals. So we'll talk specifically about some of these other types of writing that are actually going to get you the largest gifts. So everyone puts so much time in the annual giving fund writing, and then they do these little, not as good planned and major giving stuff, but the major giving stuff and the planned giving stuff is actually where all the money comes from. So we'll make sure we get some time there as well. Welcome Danny, welcome Wendy, welcome other folks as you're joining as well. Okay, quick intros. Many of you know me. I'm Patrick Schmitt. I'm lucky to be the co-founder and co-CEO of FreeWill alongside my wonderful friend Jenny, who I get to hang out with today, which is great because Jenny flew in from Seattle. I came in from New York City, and so glad to be here. Also, as we get into writing, one of the most interesting components of my life, and I've been very lucky to have an interesting life, at least to me, you don't have to think so, is that I used to be a ghostwriter for what I later learned was going to be two presidents, Joe Biden and President Obama, but back in the Obama days. And we routinely emailed 10 million people on behalf of President Obama. We raised $100 million or more. And the nice thing about having 10 million people to email, besides that you get to just raise buckets and buckets of money, is that you have enough people that you can run experiments all the time. And so we had a team of 10, which is way more email writers than any of you have. And we got to say, okay, what about this versus that? What about this versus that? And as we did, before we get off this slide, we got to actually invent a lot of the best practices in modern fundraising because you use the scientific method as opposed to just sort of inferring what might be great. And so we learned a lot of things along the way. And we learned a lot of things by being wrong a lot. We'd often sort of take bets, not real bets, but sort of choose what we thought was going to win, and we'd be wrong often more than half the time, which means if a monkey was in the room, the monkey would have beat everybody with random selection. Now, thankfully, there was no monkey in the room, and we did learn a lot. One of my other big takeaways is that most people don't realize how tall Michelle Obama is. You can see in this picture. So I'm about 6'3", 6'4", just to get an inch on Barack. Now there's a chance that Michelle has heels on here, but she's a very tall woman. And so that's where some of this comes from. Okay, before we get into the fun part, FreeWill is the #1 planned giving solution in the United States, trusted by almost 2,000 nonprofits, including many of you. Thank you so much. We saw some folks in the chat who've signed up this past week, so welcome. We love working with you. Some of you have been here for 6, 7 years. We love working with you too. Everything from the Red Cross and the American Heart Association and the United Way, all the way down to small local dog shelters. So glad to be here. Also featured in lots of cool news. Okay, FreeWill team, which is a lot of the wind beneath our wings here, has generated almost $12 billion to date, again, for almost 2,000 partners, over 4 centuries of combined fundraising experience, probably going on 5. And before we get started, last piece of housekeeping, we try to think of different ways to tell you we love you. A lot of it's putting in tons of hours into making your life a little better by doing this, but we also want to tell you we're going to send copies of one of my very favorite books. In fact, I am 80% of the way done right now. So some of you have read this as well. Haven't totally done it, but the first 80% is so good that I feel very comfortable giving it away and telling you it is one of my favorite books I've ever written, or ever read. Excuse me, I did not write this. This book is called A Swim in a Pond in the Rain. It's by George Saunders, and we're giving it to 20 people as a gift. Make a note in the survey at the end of the session. So we'll drop like again, link to a survey at the end of the session. If you like it, make sure to include your address. Why is this book so good? Why do we love it so much? It is totally different than any book we've ever given away, and likely totally different than any book you've ever read. So George Saunders, who wrote Lincoln in the Bardo, for those of you that have heard of that, that won a huge number of awards. Um, teaches a class every year at Syracuse University, and he talks about how it was the time in his life when he's the happiest. Presumably, he has a great family life as well. But outside of that, the thing he loves is teaching this course on Russian short stories. So Chekhov, Tolstoy, Gogol, others, these sort of 10 or so of great Russian short stories. And then the book contains the entire story because these are all way off of copyright. So the entire story, and then a bunch of discussion by George about what makes the story so great. And unlike, you're probably not reading a ton of literary criticism, but unlike other literary criticism, it's just super well written. It's written for normal people like us and not necessarily sort of English PhDs, and it's awesome. So I individually love the short stories, right? The short stories are just so good. It's sort of thought of that the great Russian writers are the masters of short stories in the universe. And then the discussion is so interesting and breaking down why this story holds our attention or where we might lose it or different components of it. Anyway, 10 out of 10. Can't wait to give it to you. But we thought it was a great sort of tie-in with what we're going to talk about, which is other types of great writing that you are going to do. And so, anyone can be a great writer, including you. And so we will, anyway, make a note at the end of the session, and we'll give that away to a bunch of folks. And by the way, if you don't get it, you can always buy it at your local independent bookstore. Okay, how's your week going? Look, we know a little bit less happy, a little more anxious after last week. Markets are down in the world. It's a pretty chaotic period, to be honest. But as Churchill said, never let a good crisis go to waste. So we'll talk about some opportunities you might seize in this moment. Interestingly, in terms of overall how confident people are to hitting their goals this week, you're seeing it even tick up, right? So personally, we're like, what's going on here? Professionally, we're doing quite well. Now, some of you saw the Free Minute that we published yesterday. Free Minute is a weekly video. It's about 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and it just summarizes what happened in the last week. So it's less like big strategy. Just says, if I'm a nonprofit fundraiser, what do I need to know to start the week to be a little bit more informed? A couple of things we talked about: markets in turmoil, but really interesting data coming out of the Nonprofit Philanthropic Trust, NPT, and Fidelity. What do they show? That donor advised fund gifts were up 20 to 25% in 2024. Now, we shared in the previous Free Minute that in 2025, we're seeing enormous year-over-year growth compared to 2024. So we're seeing a lot of growth, especially in major giving, as well as planned giving as well. So, oh, Phoebe, thanks so much. Phoebe just dropped a link into the chat. If you would like to sign up for the Free Minute and you haven't, which is all to say that an hour video is not enough, you want an additional 3 minutes of news as it happens, feel free to click there as well. Thank you, Phoebe. You are the best. All right. When we ask folks how confident you are in your professional writing, you can see a lot of people are like, hey, I'm pretty good. I'm a 4. Half of us are a 4. Some of you are crushing. This 21% is a 5. Some of you are like, I'm sort of in the middle. No one says I'm not confident at all. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in this job. But a quarter of you say I'm a 3. And we're going to shift all of this up, even the 5s. We know you're going to learn something today. And if you have initial thoughts, please add them to the chat, right? So our 5s help us out as we do this. All right, so let's talk about some evergreen fundraising best practices, and we'll dive in. First things first, be simple, right? So writing that is clear and as simple as accessible to more people. Complicated language offers the illusion of sophistication. You might be so proud of how smart you seem, and it will almost always result in worse outcomes. Simple language to make a point is quite challenging. Ooh, who said, it may have been Churchill again, who said, give me a minute, I can speak for an hour, but it's going to take me an hour to prepare for a minute. Someone can correct me on the source of that quote. And a 2020 study from Harvard University confirms that simpler communications are much more likely to be read. Simple language helps the reader better understand your message to take action. The same Harvard study tested how rewriting truancy letters affected students. The original letters were written at a 10th grade level. The new letters were written at an elementary reading level and worked 40% better at reducing student absence over the next month, right? And again, these are going to parents, right? They're not going to kids that aren't going to school, where you might think, yeah, fourth grade is better. This, by the way, is true all the time. Now, people say, wow, I totally get this. But my donors are educated and sophisticated. It turns out this is true across the board. I do not care if you're the Association of Rocket Scientists. I do not care if you're the American Medical Association. I don't care if you're the ABA. Simple, clear language will always do better. Lauren says, what's the Harvard study? The Harvard study will be linked in the slides that we send around, so you can follow up with that as well. Emails written at a third grade level receive 36% more responses than those at a college reading level and 17% more than a high school reading level. Now, this was actually one of the most important things I've ever read. It changed the way that I think about writing. It even changes the way I think about presenting. So many of these trainings are sort of designed to make the speaker seem really smart, when in fact, we just want to make you feel smart. And so we try to simplify it as much as possible. Things like heavy jargon, especially when talking about things like non-cash gifts or sort of more challenging financial components, can feel intimidating and overwhelming. And the reader should not get lost in legal or financial details. At the end of the day, we're asking for simple things for simple reasons, and that will help you be wildly successful. Keep it brief. The length of emails will vary depending on your audience, but almost all of you are writing too long. Generally, emails should be concise. And remember this, right? You are almost always writing your emails on a desktop device. And yet 60% of emails are opened on mobile devices, which means too many words take up too much screen space, requiring people to scroll. Now, many of you, even when you read it on a mobile device, will forget that many of your donors are older. And what correlates with being older? Poorer eyesight. Not necessarily blindness or anything like that, but you'll generally have larger font size for older donors on mobile devices. And so the scrolling that you do is even longer when someone who is older scrolls, and a really important thing to do. Keep it brief. Studies show that optimal word count for fundraising emails is 100 to 200 words. This is shorter than many emails, which means that many emails are suboptimally long. Now, that can take it'll take longer to write, and it can be less efficient. A shorter word count allows readers to consume the content in about 42 seconds, and this will drive them to take action in less time. This is a study from Easy Sendy and CNN. Be persuasive. Insight 3. Successful fundraising writing creates a case for support for your mission. The most effective forms of persuasion are impact stories, language choice, and people are more likely to be generous towards an identified individual rather than a statistical life or unnamed group at the same risk. Our mind is trained historically for empathy for an individual, or worst case, a couple of individuals, and not a giant statistic, right? Mary says, we're talking about solicitation emails or targeted e-newsletters. Mary, this is actually true for all of your fundraising. So if you're having a one-on-one conversation with a major donor, if you're doing a targeted email, if you're putting a blurb in a fundraising email, all of these things are going to be better if they're focused on one person as opposed to broad groups. In a study, participants were presented with information about a child in need of medical treatment. One group was provided with the child's age, name, and picture, making it specific. The other group was told about a child without any of the identifying features. Participants in the first group were willing to donate over 75% more compared to the second group, right? So we see real differences here. The same is true for something like planned giving. Planned giving focused appeals with donor testimonials where one person talks about giving sent by FreeWill drove higher bequest rates than those without. Also, this is really interesting and counterintuitive, and people don't believe it when I tell them, but it's still true. Presenting general statistics alongside an individual story actually decreases gift. So what you're writing, what's going to happen is, let's say that you are a cheetah conservation organization. You're going to want to talk about one cheetah. And then at the end, you're going to be like, and there are millions of cheetahs like this person, and 55% of them are in need of help or whatever. And that's actually going to suppress giving rates, even though you can't help but write it, right? So really try to hold yourself to this idea of one story and do your best there as well. Stephanie says, this is a great question. What if you're working with vulnerable people, groups, and it's not wise to share certain details? it's actually reasonable for you to share a generalized story about a specific person. Hey, for privacy reasons, I'm not going to give you too much information about the person's name, but I want to tell you a story of someone who walked in here yesterday. Situation X, situation Y, their child X, not their real name, but really, it doesn't keep you from having to paint a picture, right? Joanne says, what do we fundraise for National Park? Same thing. This summer, a child's going to walk into Yellowstone for the first time, and their experience is going to go one of two directions based on whether we can fund this or not. And when that child walks in, you can imagine them, right? They're backpack tight, maybe they're holding their parents' hands, their sneakers getting dirty for the first time, et cetera, right? And really paint that vividness, and then it pivots, right? Now, same thing in national parks. Take this off a person for a second, and instead just talk about one park, right? Don't sort of be like, the national parks are amazing, right? It's very easy to say across our great land from the Grand Canyon to Arcadia or whatever it may be, right? You sort of want to do that, but if you can really focus on one park or one specific story, you'll do better off as well. Here's an example of something we love from the SF animal control, right? And so we have some elements here. Oops, let's go back. And what you have here is a specific story, not about the impact, but about a specific person who made a gift. And it really helps you sort of zero in on the experience of that one person. This is Alex and Danny. And then they have a quote from there, and it really talks about their own lives as well. Insight 4. Emotion moves people, but not too much emotion. This is really interesting. Again, something that's not obvious. So we really got to dive into the data here. Crafting messages that evoke specific emotions, positive or negative, will help create a greater connection with your reader. Right? So we have either one of those two options, and sometimes things will be good and sometimes things will be bad. We want donors to feel something that influences decision-making processes in your brain. An added challenge is that it can't be so overly emotional or too extreme one direction that it actually then depresses. So your curve sort of looks like this. It goes in and out, right? So non-emotional, poor, medium emotional in either direction, positive or negative, strong, too emotional, poor again. I'll show you some data here as well. But it's a very significant factor, and we can do this because we can measure, we can use AI and machine learning to look at the sort of overall positive and negativity in a message and then map it against success. So what you see here is these neutral emails don't go so well, but a moderately negative, we're really upset about this thing that happened. We're really worried about this thing. Or a relatively positive. But if you go so far and say this is the best thing that ever happens, people sort of pull back. Or if you say this is the worst thing that's ever happened, it's really sort of an interesting dynamic there as well. And so you really want to sort of measure to be medium happy, medium sad. It's a really interesting dynamic as well. Because now let's just dive in for a second. I think we have the time to do it. Why is it that too happy or too sad or too angry doesn't work? Well, actually, if you say this is the worst thing that's ever happened, then the reader finds themselves arguing against you and is less moved. Whereas you need to make sure to meet the moment in terms of actually how poor it is. And if anything, you want a reader to say, oh, this is even worse than you're saying, right? But not necessarily be the one that pulls back. So interesting there. Emotion really matters. A moderate amount of emotion can increase response rates by 10 to 15% compared to neutral or strong emotional language. Things like great, wonderful, delighted, pleased are how we measure positive. Bad, hate, furious, terrible, sad. These are how we measure negative as well. All right. Great writing tells a story. Now, we've already talked about this. We're really focused on one person, but the storytelling helps us build connection, raise awareness, and show impact. Most of you, when you get off of work, you go read novels or you watch movies or TV, and you don't read annual reports because the annual reports don't have enough stories in them compared to the other things that we really want to do. In fact, stories are remembered up to 22 times more than facts alone, which is wild. 56% of those who support nonprofits online confirm that online storytelling is what motivates them to take action. The other 44% are mostly lying. Narrative arcs in our bodies produce love and stress hormones that affect the way how we feel, which affects how we act, right? So you're going to sit here and you might think, well, I'm a perfectly logical person. You're not. I know this because I'm not. Um, and science tells us the same thing. One experiment shows that participants who watched an emotional story and produced oxytocin were more willing to donate to charity afterwards. And we'll go forward on actually how to do that. So that's a little bit of background. What makes good writing? Now, how do we actually put this in practice? What are some tips for outstanding writing? Well, we asked you what metrics you use to evaluate the effectiveness. A lot of you say open rates, interesting. Conversion rates, how few people unsubscribe, how much you donate, average gift size. Some of you are doing A/B testing. If you're a smaller organization, the odds are your p-values, which means how many people we need to send to get really good information, aren't high enough in order to do that, and other. All right, so now let's break it down, right? We're gonna give you the Julia Childs level recipe for great fundraising messages, particularly emails. First things first, tap into curiosity with a creative subject line. The message of the hard work and the message of your appeal does not matter if donors are not opening your emails. 67% of people say the subject line of an email influences whether they'll open it. Nonprofits send an average of 63 emails to a subscriber a year. And what we're looking for here is to create what we call a curiosity gap, a gap between what we currently know and what we want to know. Okay, so the curiosity gap, hold that in mind. If you're in your subject line, try to pique interest and withhold key information to encourage open rates. It's like pausing a story at a climactic moment. We're introducing it as an unlikely outcome, but do not overpromise and underdeliver, right? So if you wanted a 100% open rate, you might say something like free money inside. But if there's not free money inside, then you've lost trust and you don't get me next time. Irrelevance is the top factor that turns people off of an email. Make sure it has value to the reader and not just to the organization, which is a thing that we see as well. Here's some examples. The best way to help in uncertain times. The one thing we can't do without. A quick win for your community. We thought you'd be interested in this. This is what's making a big difference right now. What's happening behind the scenes this week? Now, what do these all have in common? They tell you what's going to be in there, but they don't totally tell you what's going to be in there. And so you're saying, well, I'll just read a little bit because I'm sort of curious what the quick win is, what you thought I'd be interested in, what's happening behind the scenes this week. These are all great opportunities. Once we have that, right? Once we have our subject line in place, then we need to, it's not enough, right? We've earned the open of the email. Now we need to grab the attention with the first line. The average person spends only 9 seconds reading an email. In 2018, it was 13.4 seconds. What do we know from this? It means in 2027, it's likely to be even less than 9 seconds because trends tend to continue, right? So we have to be really good at this. After hugging supporters with your subject line, you have 9 seconds to catch people's attention before they move on. By the way, what else was happening around 2018? Well, that was while we were on the journey in transitioning most emails being read from desktop to smartphones. So your on-the-go attention span is less than your sitting at a desk attention span, right? So we want to make sure that we're grabbing folks as well. Don't waste precious space. Start with your most important information to your reader. So what's the important part? Updates on your organization. Did you ever wonder what happens when we hit our fundraising goal? Here's a peek. Big news about your work or mission. As an example, this week we hit a major milestone in our mission. It's all thanks to you. How are we providing with our value to the reader? Are you making a list for spring cleaning? Here's one thing you actually need to do, right? Now we're really building on this promise. Now, in fundraising asks, which is different than stewardship emails or other things like that, we want to highlight what we call the impact gap, right? So we already have the curiosity gap, which really drives our fund rate, our open rates. Now, the thing that's going to drive your conversion rate, which is one of the things you said is the most important thing you want to work on in your emails, is what we call this impact gap. So what's in the impact gap? It's what is newly possible with their gift that would not be possible without that gift. First, we define the present moment. This month, we've been helping over 300 kids with meals, tutoring, and mentorship. Then we define the problem. But a freeze on federal funding for community programs has left us facing a major shortfall, putting these crucial services at risk. Now, what's the gap? What are we bridging the gap with? It's your gift. With your support, we can continue to make sure these kids continue to receive the help they need. Now, an even better version of this impact gap would say, this month, we're helping kids like Sarah with meals, tutoring, and mentorship. But a funding freeze means excuse me, has left us with a major shortfall, potentially putting these services at risk for Sarah and kids like her. With your support, we can do X, Y, and Z, right? So go from there. Um, Tangible impact is much more effective than generic language. One share of stock could provide 50 books for local classrooms. A gift from your donor advised fund could support groundbreaking medical research for rare diseases. A contribution from your IRA could help us restore critical habitats for endangered species. Don't say things like can help, right? Can make an impact, right? What are we making an impact on? How does this work? Tangible impact is even more important in uncertain times. So let's consider anchor points for your writing, especially during a possible recession. This becomes even more important. There are three potential anchor points for donors when they think about a gift, right? So you ask me for, you come and ask me, you ask me for $500. Say, we're doing really important work. Can I have $500? And I'm sitting here thinking, well, $500 compared to what? There's three different ways I can think about this. One is, how much does it cost me? $500, that's a lot of money. $500, like, maybe I need it. Maybe I need a new chair. That's like a plane ticket to go see my brother. $500, I don't know. And I'm trading it off against the other things I could spend it on. Now, another way is how much am I saving? Well, $500, but I'd actually be getting a $160 tax break. And now sort of like it's more valuable here, right? We start to, especially when we think about non-cash gifts that are more tax advantage, you can start to anchor and shift there. Now, the third thing is, what impact am I having? $500. Wait, I can feed 1,000 people for $500? What a deal. What a steal, right? Wow, just that whole impact for just that amount of money, that's a no-brainer. And so it's really, compared to what, or what are my other alternatives, is a really big component. So we want donors to focus often on the second or third combined. Wow, $500, but it's giving stock, so it's actually more like $300. And then for just that $300, I could help open a land trust. I could help do this. What a great deal, right? And it actually feels really interesting. That number two, savings. One thing you're going to start watching for. Let's say the market continues to get tighter. I want you to watch the ads that you're seeing, and what you're going to see here is, people start to frame spending as saving. So you'll say on a new pickup truck, in times like this, savings important. That's why on a new Toyota Tacoma, you'll get a $500 money back rebate, or, you'll get no APR for 60 months or whatever it may be. And they sort of frame spending as savings because they know people are thinking about it and they're trying to change the anchor point as well. A couple of examples here. Can you give $10,000 this year to the land trust? That is our anchor on costs. Did you know that by giving us $10,000 in appreciated stock, you might be able to save more than $5,000 in taxes this year? Anchor on savings. With a $10,000 gift of appreciated stock, you can help us finally open the path to the preserve, and this will give thousands of families a chance to experience nature in a new way next year. Well, I can help thousands of families for $10,000. What a steal, right? So just to give you a sense of these examples, start working this into your writing as you go forward. 4, keep it conversational. Going back to third grade level, do not try to sound too fancy, right? Your tone of voice matters. Try to aim for a letter to a friend. When you're like you're speaking to a close friend or a family member, hint, this picture is picture this person when you are writing. One of the rules when I was at a nonprofit early on, they said, write to your mom's best friend. It's sort of like you're still respectful of the reader, but it's still very warm and colloquial without being, just sort of purely slang, etc. There's something called the cognitive fluency effect. It says that the easier it is to process a piece of information, the more likely we'll perceive it as true and accurate. So avoid the urge to complicate your appeals, especially when it talk about non-cash gifts, but also when you talk about the work you're actually doing, right? So really important. Some of you are museums. It's very easy to want to use the sort of fanciest language around your new exhibition and try to think about, how do we explain this to a general public who probably isn't super into that particular niche of art, even if it's very exciting. So talk about why it's so exciting. Talk more about, this is actually one of the most influential pieces, et cetera, instead of getting really deep into the subgenre. Formal terms lower charitable interest, so avoid using them in your writing. There's a great study that tested make a gift to charity my will versus make a bequest to charity. 23% have said they were interested in making a gift, but only 12% said they were interested now in making a bequest, right? So these are different. These are the same thing. They're identical asks. and yet we got an almost twice as good response with simpler language. And so this is really, really important as you continue to do your work. That's from our dear friend, Dr. Russell James, who hopefully we'll have back on the webinar relatively soon. Tip 5, right from the heart. A test by Unbounce demonstrated that utilizing first person as opposed to second person increases clicks. If you're writing in second person, including a call to action, the first person actually increases likelihood the reader will click on it. What do we mean by first person? Talk about I. Second person is you. Some examples: start my plans, maximize my impact, give from my donor advised fund, right? So it's this element of the call to action is, instead of saying it's coming to you, it's sort of you in control. Start my plans, make my gift, things like that as well. Remove the we as much as possible. So the other component here is, we're writing from one person and not to, organizations don't write emails. People write emails. And so often it'll be like, Georgetown University says this. No, it doesn't. Georgetown University is a flat piece of land with some buildings on it, right? An individual at Georgetown University with their own thoughts and feelings is communicating with me. And so I can tell when it's, the organization's not sending to me something. In fact, it's the person. Don't write for multiple people unless it's a very clear reason to do so. And if you have a personal connection to your mission, make it known, right? Why are you working so hard doing this? A 2011 study found that people have a harder time saying no to an appeal when the writer has a personal connection to the cause. They don't want to be seen as disrespectful or uncaring. They aren't necessarily more convinced of the cause's merits, but they are more motivated to take action. So it's a really good chance as well. Other things to note, right? Just an example here. I'm writing today on behalf of the University Alumni Foundation. Because of the foundation, I was the first person in my family to graduate college. I'd love to tell you about the work we're doing now to help more first-gen students reach their potential. Do you have 5 minutes to talk today? Right? This is a great example. Now, you might be the first person to go to college at a different college, but that's why you wanted to join this work as well, right? Or maybe, arts changed your life as a young person. All of these things, right? Try to tie together. Or, I'm writing on behalf today because I've just loved what we're doing over here and I want to share it with you, right? It doesn't have to be a 20-year ago connection as well. All right. 6, social proof. This really works also. Philanthropy is a social act using the mechanisms for family bonding. Charitable giving is rewarding. It activates 2 different parts of the brain. The first is associated with receiving money and reward. So even though you're giving money, you still get that sort of reward center. And the second is associated with social attachment and affiliative reward mechanisms, meaning I feel closer to the people around me, right? We have a natural need to that because feeling close to community used to mean survival. It still does, according to many medical studies. So tell stories about how other folks, again, try to stick to people, not statistics, who are similar to the donor you are writing to, behave in a similar way. Don't say, hey, you can save up to 80% on taxes through stock giving. Instead say, someone in the class above you, presuming this is a college or high school, also from California, your state, just donated stock and got an almost 80% tax benefit. Now, we don't go into it too much, but there's a lot of resources on why stocks can be overwhelmingly wonderful to give. You basically get double the tax savings, avoiding capital gains, and getting a full deduction if you itemize deductions. And then sometimes you're in a high tax state and you get both those benefits again. So tons of value there as well. As an example here, right, there's the Cabinet Office of Behavioral Insights team in 2013, which is a UK office that really focused on charitable giving. In this study, showed that when you tell other folks that many customers like to leave money to charity in their will, it increases giving by 50%. And by the way, the other thing to know here is those gifts were larger than the middle category and certainly larger than the last category, the 5%. So you see a lot of benefit there as well. In 2020, we led an A/B test. Again, we're very lucky to work with so many organizations that we get access to trying different things, determine whether or not the inclusion of social proof in emails drove more planned gifts in a will or bequests to those organizations. The partners who included the following line of social proof did significantly better than those that did not. This tool is the result of our partnership with FreeWill. Since 2017, more than 160,000 people have written their wills and been featured in Forbes, the New York Times, and Oprah's 31 best ways to make a difference. Thanks, Oprah. We appreciate you, Oprah. What does it mean? It means, hey, all these other people are doing it. You should do it too, right? It's sort of like the old, all your friends are doing it line from middle school can be quite useful. This test was performed over 340,000 folks. The inclusion of social proof significantly increased the number of wills and the charitable gifts. So that is a big win. It's very helpful to have science at your fingertips. Other ways you might want to include social proof in your work, highlighting how many supporters have already signed a pledge, sharing how many donors have contributed to your latest fundraising goal, including short quotes and testimonials from those who receive services from your organization, and donors and volunteers. Why do other people care about you so much? Oh, those people, they seem reasonable, they seem like me, therefore I should care about you as well. Um, Otherwise, provide a reason to give because it's a powerful word that drives behavior. When you make a request, ask for a donation or something else, you'll be more successful when you provide a reason. Adding a reason to your request can almost double your success rate, and we're making it clear why you're asking for donations. As an example, we're sharing this with you because your gift today can help us end hunger in our city. We need your help because our emergency fund is running low and families depend on us. We're reaching out today because your gift can help us provide clean water to communities like this. Now we're reaching out today to ask for your help. We're reaching out today because this can happen. Tip 8, prioritize personalized communications. So hearing your own name triggers greater brain activation. This is particularly true, again, in the parts of the brain that are associated with social behavior and long-term memory. It tells your brain to pay attention and that the information is relevant to you. So we've tried this before a little bit, but let's say the average age on this webinar is between 35 and 45, which means if I go back to the 80s, the most common name in the early 80s would have been, on women's side would have been around Jennifer, right? So there's a bunch of Jennifers on the call. And all of those Jennifers, please confirm if this is true or not, are now paying more attention to this slide than they were 3 minutes ago because their name got called, right? Their brain sort of kicks in. Thank you, Jennifer Lynch McKinsey. Thank you, Jennifer Lee, who says yes. It also gives you, thank you, Jennifer Henry and Jennifer Lane, right? We have a lot of these folks. Thanks so much. And so you see this as well, right? So yes, we want names. Names are very helpful. Thank you, Jennifer Zemp. Remember and refer back to personal information your donor has shared with you. Thank you, JJ Sia. I'm presuming your name is Jennifer. Might not be. Remember and refer back to the personal information your donor has shared with you. And what we mean here is, what's the favorite piece of art? What's the pet's name? What's the class year? What's the kids or spouse names? The more specific we are to that person, right, the more they're going to definitely give to you. Let's send progress updates for causes they previously donated to and say, Jennifer, right, 2 years ago you donated to this cause and I wanted to give you an update on what the money you gave was used for. And then suddenly, wow, right, my brain's sort of lighting up all over because it's a specific action that I took and my own name, right, not just my own name. And so you'll see this as well. You want to name specific dates. Hey, I remember when you came here last September 13th, right? What else does it do when you can build specificity there and give them information that they might not even remember about themselves? It gives you a ton of credibility here, right? So good to you, right? If I call you and say, wow, I'd really love to talk to you about FreeWill. We had this conversation. It was back on September 13th of 2023. That was a different time. But Michael, we had this great conversation. You said at the time that these were your two priorities. Do you want to talk about this again? You'll probably say, yeah, let's go. Let's have a catch up. This sounds really good. You know what you're talking about, right? So very, very useful. 80% of consumers are more likely to purchase from a brand that provides personalized experiences. 58% of people say they prefer to hear from an individual within a nonprofit compared to those that prefer the org as a brand. So you want this one-to-one connection. 60% are inspired to give from requests by a donor relationship manager, meaning one person to one person, both with a lot of specificity, right? Very, very interesting as well. Christy makes a great point. She says, plus it's more interesting to actually communicate with donors as a real person. All of these folks are real people with a ton of depth, right? They have all the thoughts and feelings that you do. And so when we treat them as such, you will have a better time of it, as well as obviously raising more money. All right, let's talk about a couple of tips for planned giving and major giving, et cetera. We ask you, what do you feel most uncertain about? And planned giving shows up really high, above major giving, above all of the above. Some folks are concerned about non-cash giving. There's other things that aren't referenced here as well. So how do we be successful here? We're gonna use language and framing that educates. So when we talk about things like non-cash giving, stock giving, IRA giving, et cetera, you have to acknowledge this may be new to people. So they don't feel like, oh, I should know this already, and now I feel stupid. When we tell people it can be new, it triggers curiosity. instead of making them feel like they should have known about this type of giving and we're sort of looking down on them. So you might want to say, hey, did you know about this? You might be surprised to learn. I really love this surprise element. We'll talk about that in a second. Um, Educational framing is great for planned giving and major giving in particular. And it's a great way to start the conversation around something like estate planning. Hey, we're here to share stories and resources that make a difference in our communities. That's why we're spreading the word about the importance of having a will, right? So we're spreading the word. We know that this matters to other people. It might matter to you. It also solves the issue of asking donors for larger gifts when you educate them on the most impactful ways to give. So instead of saying, you should really give us $50,000, you might say, did you know that gifting stock avoids capital gains taxes? And most donors can also claim a full income tax deduction for the stock's full market value. This means the full value of your gift goes to helping the mission. And we're educating folks and we're bringing them along without creating that sort of conflict-laden direct ask early. Many of your donors want to make a larger impact, but they're not aware of these things. So giving options allow them to do so. Only 1.5% of the population considers themselves a charitable giving expert. Oftentimes, especially donor relations people, especially the major giving people, they are too deferential to donors because they assume that these wealthy folks know everything about finance, when in fact an extremely small percentage feel like they have a handle on major giving and charitable giving. And so instead we can say, you might already know this, but would you mind if I told you something? It will go a long way. When we talk about planned giving, we don't talk about death, right? Death decreases a person's interest in making a legacy gift. Reminders about death cause two reactions in people. One, I don't want to talk about it. I don't like talking about that stuff, right? Avoidance. Two, the pursuit of lasting impact. What's going to live beyond me? And we really want to lean into that second component. So instead of talking about death, focus on your communications on how to create a legacy. Avoid languages like leave a legacy. That feels like I'm exiting, I'm stepping off the stage. Use language like create, make, right? Very generative as opposed to sort of dissipation, right? Very interesting stuff here. Highlight that the plan giving is for adults of all ages. It will help older donors feel less targeted, part of a broader audience. Here's an example. Supporters of the Red Cross from 18 to 88 choose to include us in their will or trust. Would you like information on how to join them? This has the benefit of telling younger donors they can participate. It has the benefit of telling older donors that they are not targeted here as well. As a side note, in tight times, the best way you can get more money is to remind folks of their wealth. Just as an experiment, there's this famous shopping cart experiment. So shoppers entering a marketplace in Cambridge, Massachusetts, were asked, what's in your wallet? Cash, credit cards? While others were asked about their investments. Do you own stocks, bonds? Nothing else happened. These are randomly selected. The shoppers, when they come out, say, hey, can we just see your receipts for a moment? They make a little note about how much they spent. And they found that the folks who walked into the store thinking about stocks and bonds ended up spending about 36% more at the market. So maybe you own a grocery store and this will be really useful. But if you're a fundraiser, this is also quite useful as well. People who feel wealthy act charitably. In the experiment, college students were asked to report their savings using a scale ranging from 0 to 500 rather than 0 to 50,000 increased subsequent donations. This is so interesting. The thought process, not the lower bracket, so you're wealthy, right? So if you ask someone, hey, what are your savings? College kids don't have a ton of savings. If you said, what's your savings? On a 0 to 500 scale, you might be like, whoa, I've got like thousands of dollars, $2,000 in savings. Suddenly you feel very wealthy. Now that same $2,000 on a 0 to 50,000, I don't feel that good. I don't feel that rich. I'm not going to make the donation that comes right after that. So really interesting as well. How can you remind donors of their wealth? So you can ask them about investment gifts in every email. Did you know you can also give out of investments, stock, crypto, retirement assets, right? Let them know how they can donate stock and have a bigger impact, et cetera, et cetera. This not only generates investment gifts, but also increases the size of cash donations. So really interesting stuff as well. All right, that went by so fast. It's already 11:50 in the great state of Louisiana, 12:50 on the East Coast, I guess 9:50 in California. So we're just going to talk through a couple of things. So first things first, right. So my colleague Phoebe, thank you, Phoebe, has dropped back to our favorite book, right? So we're back at the start of the call. Pick this up, fill out the survey if you don't mind. We're going to send a copy of A Swim in a Pond in the Rain by George Saunders, 20 People as a gift. Um, so let us know. Please let us know your home address. We will send it to you. We promise not to knock without asking, but we are going to send you a book if you win it. So give that to us. Second piece, on Thursday, we haven't talked at all about grant writing in the session. Grant writing is a very different ballgame than appeals writing. And recently, we've been working extremely hard on a product called Grant Assistant, which can help you win a lot more grant funding in one third of the time. Grant Assistant is unbelievably amazing. It does two things. It helps you use AI to help you find the best fit funders with grant opportunities, open grant opportunities, and then it helps you apply for them by doing the writing for you. And then you are just an editor on the back end. It's honestly people that look at it and use it describe it as magic. We would love to show it to you if you haven't seen it. If you have seen it, there are a bunch of updates that we would love for you to come hang out with us anyway, and you'll learn a bunch of new things. Grace said we are. Thank you, Grace. Grace Cheryl just said we just signed up with Grant Assistant. She says it's so useful for a small team. Thank you so much, Grace. Beth says she's a beta giving a Grant Assistant user, et cetera, et cetera. So we would love to have you here. This will be in 47 hours from right now, 12 o'clock Eastern, 11 o'clock Louisiana time. So you'll see me in the same spot. It'll be about half an hour on Thursday. So we would love to have you here if you like to join. Oh, other things. We have session two. If you are interested in grants, next Thursday, the 20th at noon Eastern, we are doing our second session with Melissa Vermillion of Grant Writing Kentucky. The first session got as many rave reviews as I've ever seen a trainer get. It was unbelievably helpful. Now, it is if you don't do grants or you don't have any interest in grants, don't come. But if you are either trying to start a grant program or you do a lot of grants already, Melissa was amazing. Melissa trains thousands and thousands of organizations a year. Herself has generated $50 million in grant funding, and she was outstanding. People enjoyed it. Everything we talked about in this presentation about being clear and concise and actionable, she did it. So if you want to come check that out, we think the world of Melissa. And so we've partnered with Grant Writing Kentucky. FreeWill actually sponsors this whole thing. So these are trainings that might cost $500 or $1,000 to come to, and they're all free. So please join us there. You can just sign up in the survey for it. There's a bunch of questions about whether or not the first session was recorded. So maybe what we can do is if you sign up for the second session, we can also send you a recording of the first session. So that'll be next Thursday. So this is 9 days away as well. So great. Okay, last things. If you haven't already, please take the survey. Take the survey again. Link is in the chat. But please do that as well. Okay. What's next? So in 2 weeks, excuse me, we are doing our next webinar of this sort on March 25th at noon Eastern. Again, 11 a.m. Louisiana. And we're going to deep dive for women's philanthropy in 2025. We're going to talk about the latest research and best practices. There's a lot of folks sort of ask us, why do you even do women's philanthropy? Like, why does it matter? Why does it divvy it up? When you look at it demographically, especially over the next 10 years, women are going to control an enormous portion of the wealth, and the data shows that there are some different giving behaviors. And so we'd love to have you there. I'm going to team up on this one with my dear friend and colleague, Lauren Winter Hansen. Those of you that are FreeWill partners know Lauren as our training lead for all our partners. She's amazing. So you're going to get two of us on for the same price of nothing in 2 weeks on the 25th. So please join this as well. Mary asks again, how do we get the slides? So if you drop a survey, if you fill out the survey, we will send you the recording, the slides, the chance to win the book. You can sign up for the Grant Assistant demo that we're talking about Thursday, et cetera, et cetera. So that's that. We hope this was useful to you. We really appreciate you coming. We know that your time is super precious. We hope this is useful. And we hope you have a wonderful week. Also, to those of you grant writers, Thursday or Friday, I actually need to go check. I think it might be Friday, is International Grant Writers Day. And so happy International Grant Writers Day to you as well. And love having you all here. Have a great rest of the week. I'm going to go back and hang out with our executive team who's been working without me. So hopefully they're not taking the strategy in a whole other direction. And I will talk to you all on Thursday. Take care.